His name is Pavol Krajčovič. I'm sorry. He is from Slovakia. He's a young researcher and he is an assistant professor at the Department of Historical Science and Central European Studies at a Slovakian university. And he will talk about the Habans in Slovakia through the lens of Hungarian and we are very curious what you have to say about the lens. Thank you very much.
So hello. Thank you for the word, and I would like to firstly express my gratitude to be here. Thank you. My gratitude to be here. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Sibylla. And as the colleague said, my presentation is focused on Habans in Slovakia through the lens of old Hungarian ethnography. Within my presentation, I focus on the analysis, interpretation, and information that come from the works of two specific Hungarian authors from the era of 18th and 19th century. Their names are Matthias Bell, in Slovak Matej Bell, in Hungarian Bell Matyáš, and Pavol Jedlička or Jedlička Pál. In their multi-volume works, Historical and Geographical Knowledge of New Hungary, or abbreviated Knowledge, and the Little Carpathian Monuments, respectively, are, among other data of ethnographic nature, also the important information of settlements, the way of everyday life, and history of Haban population. In terms of my research, critical analysis is an important element in exploring objective historical reality, as the works of both the authors were influenced by then period realities such as ethnic and religious stereotypes. During the 17th and 18th centuries, works began to be created in the Hungarian environment, which can be classified as historical topographies. One of the most important authors of this epoch was the Hungarian scholar, polymath, teacher, geographer, historian, and evangelical priest born in the village of Očova, Matthias Bell. He knew several languages, studied and worked in many Hungarian cities, also beyond the border of the then Hungarian kingdom, and with his works and activities contributed to the development of science, education, culture, language, and literature. After his death, he earned the nickname, the Great Ornament of Hungary. In the first, second, and fourth volumes of the extensive work I already mentioned, Knowledge or Notitia, which were published in 1735, 1736, and 1742, were, from the perspective of Slovak territory, the descriptions of Bratislava, Turiec, Zvolen, Liptov, Novohrad, Tekov, Nitra, and Han counties. Knowledge has not only geographical but also historical and ethnographic character. In the natural scientific section and in the characteristics of individual settlements, for example, information about the country, spa, or the way of life of higher social strata, nobility, townsmen, but also the simple urban people and rural people can be found. Matthias Bell used the initial historical methods, especially heuristic research in knowledge, but also carried out the landscape survey of the country. Based on the work in knowledge, Bell can be described as a capable manager or organizer of scientific work. This is evidenced by the creation of more extensive site of co-workers from various science fields of the towns of the then Hungary. And at the same time, he can be considered as a composer, scientific editor, or encyclopedist in the management of planning scientific research. He was the first expert in the Hungarian environment to carry out such a complicated and extensive scientific activity in practice. Although the individual descriptions are processed at a diverse level, yet knowledge is the first scientific experiment on a comprehensive view of the historical, geographical, and ethnographic issues of the then Hungary. The information about Habans who are in the knowledge labeled under the name Anabaptists are in chapters that relate to the content of Bratislava. It's actually second volume of knowledge, respectively Nitra County. That's fourth volume of knowledge. A total of 5 sites are captured in knowledge describing the presence of Haban population. These are the current villages Velke Levare, Sobotište, Dechtice, Košolná, and also surroundings of Branch Castle. Bell described the two specific Záhorie sites, Velke Levare and Sobotište, as the most important Haban settlements. According to him, there were Anabaptist colonies, or in Latin, Anabaptistarium coloniae, in these municipalities. According to Bell, the colony in Velke Levare was on the west side of the village. He described the chapel, oratorium, as a spiritual center of Haban community in which there was only one table and several chairs. An important historical monument for the Anabaptists from Velke Levare was some kind of a column. This object, probably a whipping post, has used their community in the past to punish the offenders. It was not stated by Bell what a particular sourcism was punished in this way. However, according to information from knowledge to the place where the offender was placed, the column or whipping post, his co-religionist spat. It was a sign of the resistance of the whole community to the crime, and at the same time it was to serve the offender to realize how much he was ashamed of by wrongdoing. Interesting is the information about the determination of Haban nationality. According to Bell, they were Czechs, Bohemi, and Germans, Germani. Bell probably meant by this statement about their nationality, mostly the Czech, their early migration from Czech countries, especially from Moravia. Their main character trait considered their great modesty, magna modestiae, which was also closely related to their diligence. When describing the professional focus of Habans from Velke Levare, it is possible to feel the praise of their craft skills. There was no manual work, according to Bell, that they would not control. Above all, however, they excelled in pottery, fictilium, and knife manufacturing culture. Bell and his collaborators were also devoted to the time of the arrival of the first groups of Anabaptists to the village. According to them, the royal decrees, Regni Decreta, were listed in 1554. Other Anabaptists settled there in 1593 and 1595. The Haban courtyard in Sobotište is listed under the Latin nickname Aula Anabaptistica, as well as the Slovak name Dvůr Habanský. It was located on the west side of the village and was founded by exiles from Moravia, Uzos ex Moravia, who used the hospitality of the local estate. From their own resources, settled Anabaptists built several modest but comfortable houses, and the historical closure of the Haban community is also emphasized. It is stated that here, at these houses forming the Haban courtyard, were separated from other inhabitants of Sobotište by the wall. In addition to the dwellings, the Anabaptists were supposed to get a power field which they then exploited. At another place of the text, it is stated that these modest people, in Latin genus, were strictly disciplined. This feature was based on their religious regulations. The mention of their craft skills, pottery and ceramics, are the first. They were able to produce neat ceramics of all kinds. In addition, they were also devoted to blacksmithing and knife production. They seem to have been in demand, as the text states, that they were sold across the whole country, means then a kingdom of Hungary. Shaving and the art of bread production, bakery, are also mentioned among other Haban crafts. Relations with population outside the Haban community seem to have been quite correct based on the information from knowledge. The good opinion of fellow citizens should have increased with affordable and quality products. Interesting is also the mention of Haban wine products, or simply wine. It was supposed to be even tastier and cheaper than the wine from the other Sobotište residents. The Haban religious life is mentioned only within the retrospective. At the past, they were supposed to celebrate their faith together with their co-religionists around Trenčín. It was when the Anabaptist community flourished, and this was probably the period before the departure of a large part of Habans from Hungary. During the Koln celebrations, Sobotište Habans performed a rather unknown ritual. It was also known to the Anabaptists from Velke Levare. In knowledge are also mentioned the Haban settlements, which no longer existed at the time of Bell's writing, or were only a small number of members of this community there. They were located in the villages of Dechtice, Košovna, and the surroundings of Branch Castle. In the section of the text dedicated to Dechtice, it is recorded that pottery figuli was made by local Habans. For their typically white ceramics, they used white clay, candida humo, with the using of an elegant technique. These Habans were able to produce diverse pottery products. At the mention of Košovna, it is stated that in this elegant village, which was once inhabited by the Habans at the past, at the time, the first half of the 18th century, was kept their art pottery of craft. Despite its austerity, the report about Habans from Košovna is very praised. The Anabaptists were said to be remarkable in every direction, especially in pottery. In this part of the text of the knowledge, one relatively curious information is also written. It states that Habans made their ceramics products by imitating the Indian. In knowledge, it is not justified the claim that the Habans from Košovna were by the Indian environment, the production of their ceramics. However, it is important to know that Haban ceramics from this village were typical of the scenes of peasants, shepherds, floral, and geometric patterns. In addition, ceramic products of Habans living in Slovakia were generally characterized by the use of white and blue glazes. It is also interesting to know that Austrian historian Bertolt Koenig indicated the connection of the Habans within the Indian environment. According to him, around 1500, began to be imported from China and India quality ceramic products with white glaze. They quickly spread to the area of Switzerland, where the Anabaptist movement was later formed. Specifically, religious exiles knew the technique of production of ceramics inspired by the Indian and Chinese environment and brought it to the other regions of Central and East Central Europe during their migration. According to Bell, the Habans living around the Branch Castle, Arx Berenc, came here in an indefinite era, which fell into the Turkish raids, 16th to 17th century, the territory of contemporary Slovakia. During one of these invasions, when the situation in the country was not safe, several refugees from the surrounding villages settled outside the walls of Branch Castle, a kind of camp was built for them, which was fortified by 2 palisades and a water ditch. Inside such a fortified camp, there were also several simple dwellings, which were partly inhabited by Habans, Anabaptist party. It is important to note that the arrival of the Habans to the camp under the castle branch is linked historically to year 1623 and was related to the anti-Habsburg uprising of Gabriel Bethlen. He and his Turkish allies penetrated to the Moravian border at that time. Undoubtedly, an important figure within the 19th century Hungarian academic sphere was a regional historian, collector, monumenter, archaeologist, or even later papal prelate Pavol Krajčovič. During his priestly work in Chasta, he became intensively interested in regional history. A reflection of this is his study from 1868 about historical sites of Chasta, which he published in the Hungarian written periodical called Hungarian Sion, or Magyar Sion. However, a relatively overlooked fact is that Jedlička also released 2 valuable registers in 1897, Rabbi Hero Nicholas Palfi and his time, and also he reported brief contents about other members of Palfi family from more than 1,160 documents. They came mostly from the archive of Červený kameň Palfi line. In the Slovak environment, the most famous Pavol Jedlička work is the 2-volume historical publication Little Carpathian Monuments. The first volume was published in 1882 and bears the subtitle From Červený kameň to Smolenice, and the second part from 1891 has a subtitle From Ostrý kameň to Nové Mesto nad Váhom. Both volumes of the Little Carpathian Monuments are captured by the history of castle estates, their owners, serf villages, and towns. When Jedlička was writing his work, he used a variety of written sources from several archives. However, he also gained many knowledge through field observation. Little Carpathian monuments are also beneficial from ethnographic point. However, in my research, it is especially important that both volumes contains knowledge about Haban population. In the part from 1882, there is a description of 2 at the time no longer existing Haban settlements located in Košovna and Vlčkovce. The knowledge of them was acquired by Jedlička from the German written chronicle written by Jan Čederla, and his chronicle was the property of a notary from Dechtice. Based on information from this 17th century chronicle, Jedlička stated that the first reports about Habans in Košovna were from the year 1626. In the same year, Anabaptists from Košovna, together with their fellows from Vlčkovce, had to leave their dwellings for 3 months because of the looting army. Soldiers who attacked Košovna even stole 8 pieces of Haban cattle and 2 horses. In addition, their barns and dwellings were also set on fire. Here, however, the plundering army did not stop. Habans from Vlčkovce, in fear of the army that headed toward Šintava, fled to Trnava and then to Červený kameň. In addition to these settlements were in September, respectively October 1726, by the Imperial Army attacked also, and at the same time Imperial Army attacked Haban courtyards in Brodské, Častkovce and Dechtice. Jedlička stated also that in this period a large part of Habans from Vlčkovce was exterminated by the Turks. In Čederla's chronicle, extensive information about the Turkish Tatar attack was recorded. More specifically, it was Crimean Tatars, which took place on September 3rd, 1663, between 10 to 11 a.m. Anabaptists were surprised by a quick attack. Some were killed and 43 took into slavery. The survivors were hidden in the fields and at the lake and later found a refuge in Červený Kameň. Here they were supposed to live in a considerable misery for more than a year. During the looting of the Haban courtyard, the attackers captured 8 horses, 24 pieces of cattle, and 450 sheep. In addition, on 6th December broke out a fire and the courtyard was completely destroyed. At the time of the writing, the second half of the 19th century, according to Jedlička, the memento about the Habans from the collective memory of the local population from Vlčkovce gradually disappeared. Only the knowledge of the place where their courtyard was remained. I would also like to add the information that the attacks on some Haban settlements in this period were closely related to the struggles between the Hungarian and Turkish Tatar troops, and the destruction of the Habar Kurt in Vlčkovce was specifically related to the Turkish attack on Hlohovec. When finding out information about Habans, Jedlička also focused on the research of the registry. According to his claim, it was possible in the registry records of the village Sucha nad Parnou from 1637 to 1716 to identify some names of recatholized Anabaptists from Košovna, but which specific people it was not stated. Interesting is also the mention of the Haban courtyard in this village. It was located in the northeast part of the village next to the mill. Even in the 19th century, the local population knew this site under the name of the Haban courtyard. At some time, his administration was supposed to be withdrawn from Anabaptists, and the migrants from Czechia, Moravia, and Silesia were invited to their place. Jedlička also recorded the Hungarian and Slovak names for the guards, Anabaptista Udvarnak, respectively Habanský dvor. However, Jedlička considered the most important Haban settlements to be in Sobotište and here in Velke, Levare. In the mention of the religious life of Anabaptists, Jedlička stated a brief data concerning the past of all Haban settlements. The most important persons at the forefront of individual Haban courtyards were spiritual leaders, preachers. At the same time, these persons also had judicial powers and managed various administrative matters. According to him, the Habans from Košovna were not numerous, therefore could not afford to finance their own spiritual representative. And at another place of the text, Jedlička also mentioned one of the typical Haban crafts, pottery. According to him, it was likely that in Košovna, once this craft pottery was extremely flourishing. In the private collection of some people, a significant amount of different Haban ceramics have been preserved, which, according to the oral tradition, was to come from Košovna. Even among the local population, the awareness of the fact that the most beautiful pottery products were produced in Košovna was maintained. The largest space about Habans were in the second volume of the Little Carpathian Monuments. On approximately 3 pages, Jedlička wrote almost exclusively about Anabaptists living in Dechtice. He believed that the beginnings of the Haban settlements in this village may have reached until the first half of the 16th century. He relied specifically on the letter of Count Thomas Erdédy, which was written in Smolenice on May 23, 1606. It contained an indication from Dechtice priest Albert Bogdanovci, according to which some of the peasants alienated properties from both Dechtice churches. It occurred specifically at the time of the heretical priests. We can see some Catholic bias from Jedlička here. And this report was evidence for the Jedlička that the Protestant clergy were to be found in Dechtice at the beginning of the 16th, 17th century. However, he was not sure whether it was direct Anabaptists or another group of Protestants. Jedlička had several available data towards the Dechtice Habans. They settled firmly in 1626, And based on the information from the Erdődy archive in Chtelnica, they were used to use one of the village's house. However, it was tied to various counter services. It was probably part of the profit from their craft work. In 1650, they had rented part of the mansion in nearby Chtelnica from Count Elizabeth Erdődy. At the same time, they were settled in Dechtice in a rented home from Count Judita Amade. Some of the properties Habans also had in the villages of Kátlovce, Horné Dubové, Kočín, today Kočín Lančar, and Šterusi. Written reports from the later period recorded by Jedlička have already shown that the compact Haban community was created in Dechtice in the second half of the 17th century. For example, on 1663 he stated that from this period the record of the Haban yard came. The reports about it also came from the 18th century, specifically from the will of Count and the landscape judge George György Erdődy. Jedlička also described the localization of the Haban courtyard. It was located on the northeast side of the village. His autonomous position within Dechtice is evident by the fact that this yard was separated from the non-Haban population by the flow of the Blava stream. According to Jedlička, houses that were part of the courtyard were still in their original state at the time. They were typical of having a habitable attic, and in another place of Jedlička's text, he highlighted the resistance of Haban roofs, which were made of straw and mud. They had a lifetime of 100 years and were even fire resistant. I would like to add that these fireproof roofs were mentioned already in 1823 by Hungarian geographer and statistician Paul Magda also. In the mention of crafts, Jedlička noted that the Habans from Dechtice focused mainly on pottery and to some extent to show making. However, he also wrote the general data relating to all Habans in Slovakia. According to him, all types of craftsmen were found among the members of this community. Namely, they were mainly tailors, shoemakers, cutlers, drapers, and potters. A sign of their strict discipline was that they almost did not talk during their working period. And within the description of the Haban crafts, Jedlička helped himself with the Czech vocabulary of František Ladislav Rieger. The information he drew from this Czech writer are specifically in third volume of his work. Jedlička also devoted himself to Haban religion in some extent. The Anabaptists, on the basis of his claim, recognize only the baptism in adulthood. They consider the baptism of newborns invalid. Every Haban settlement had a person who was intended to spread the word of God. This religious representative was elected from the so-called older brothers and was in charge of the religious life of members of his community. This included, for example, baptism or education of older brothers in faith. He proclaimed reception under both ways, and if he happened to be trained in some craft, he also devoted himself to this secular aspect of everyday life. At the same time, the Anabaptists living within one district, several courtyards, also had the main spiritual person, which also belonged to the highest secularity. According to Jedlička, his position could be compared to the Catholic bishop. The beginnings of the formation of Anabaptists, according to Jedlička, could be dated to the life of several important theologians and at the same time reformers. Specifically, it was Thomas Müntzer, Martin Cellarius, and Nikolaus Storch. They were supposed to preach their teachings in Saxony, namely in Zwickau. From there, these reform ideas were then extended to Switzerland and Levare, Germany. Later, they also appeared in the Czechia and Moravia. The main pillar of Anabaptists was based on Jedlička's claim, a common property management. It was because of the egalitarian way of life that the Anabaptists were a frequent object of various persecutions, and it was supposed to disturb the authority of individual nobility. At the same time, they refused idolatry or worship of various statues and paintings also. And I would I would also add that other authors also talked about or wrote about Anabaptists to some extent, like Paul Magda. Yes, okay, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Unfortunately, I think we cannot have question space. We cannot open space for questions because we have a very rigid time schedule.